Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a couple of the more outrageous features of Boris Johnson that he appears to be leading with as he ramps up publicity for his upcoming memoirs. That is that he thinks it's somehow a good idea to remind us that he was stupid enough to actually want to invade Europe, and that he is retracting all of his apologies for Partygate. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So yes, expect to hear more from Boris Johnson in the next few weeks as his book is about to be published. Normally, when former prime ministers publish their memoirs, they use it as an opportunity to paint their time in office in the best possible light. Johnson seems determined to use it to show just how unfit for office he was. The issue with invading the Netherlands, for example, now we already knew about this. I discussed it when it was reported at the time. But I think in the context of a lot of what's happened since, it seems especially insane for Johnson to not only include it in his memoirs, but he's actually boasting about it. He's still trying to justify it as if it should have happened. The intended plan was to steal vaccines from a storage facility in the Netherlands. Johnson apparently justifies this by saying, the vaccine was developed in Britain, so of course it's all ours. How on earth is this any different to Putin's stated reasoning for invading Ukraine? He sees Ukraine's assets as Russia's. Well, I think they're mine, so I'm going to take them. But also, it was the furthest thing from the truth. It's actually Johnson who, if anything, held vaccines in the early days of the vaccination programme. We were importing doses from other countries, right? But we're blocking exports produced in this country, even to fulfil contracts with other countries. The EU Commission was so outraged that they initially made a huge misstep, and they sort of thought about blocking exports to the UK itself. Only they decided to do this by thinking, well, we'll suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol to do this, which was such a stunningly bad move that they cancelled the policy a few hours later when more sane voices held sway. Unfortunately, it was locking the stable door after the horse had bolted. It did its own damage because Johnson at that point thought, oh, well, if you can suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol when you're mad, I can do the same. And then we had 2 years of absolute nightmare. But anyway, I digress. The point is that Johnson actually thought he was justified in invading one of our neighbours and went as far as asking the military to draw up plans. Said military came back with a response along the lines of, are you effing mental? Now, I don't know exactly what words they used. I don't have security clearance. But that was reportedly the gist of it. And so the plan never went any further. But with what's happened since, you then begin to wonder, well, how did this idea ever come about? I mean, I originally just thought, well, Boris Johnson's that stupid. He would have just thought, oh, I want more vaccines. There's more vaccines over there. We'll just steal them. Because, he's incredibly conceited. He has this idea that just, that sort of ego that just thinks, well, if I want something, I'm just going to take it. But now I'm thinking, well, I'm not so sure now, because the way his operation has been described, you have like all of these people suggested things. Oh, Prime Minister, you should do this, you should do this. And we're told that it's like the last person to leave the room is the one that gets their way. So was this plan suggested to Johnson? If so, by whom and why? Because you think, well, who would benefit? Not the UK. No one would suggest this if they're acting in the UK's interest. Invading anyone's quite dodgy, but invading a NATO country, the treaty requires consequences. Now, I don't know exactly what they'd be. It'd be all quite embarrassing whether it's an actual NATO country invading this other NATO country. But diplomatic and economic sanctions of some sort would have to be coming our way. When our economy had already been hit worse than any other G7 country during the height of COVID, we'd just left the single market and customs union. So we were starting the process of strangling our own supply chains. Couldn't really afford external economic sanctions on top. Remember, this is principally why Rishi Sunak agreed the Windsor Framework. It was to head off the incoming economic sanctions as a result of our failure to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol. But Russia would love it if one NATO country invaded another. You think about it, especially now. At the time, Putin must have been planning the invasion of Ukraine at this point. So discord within Europe, ideal. And we know that a lot of people with strong connections to Russia generally, and in some cases Putin personally, had Johnson's ear. Given everything else we know about the way Johnson was compromised as regards the Kremlin, it now doesn't seem too much of a stretch to me to suppose this idea ultimately came from those pushing Putin's interests. Fortunately, things aren't quite as simple as Prime Minister has brain fart and officials rush into action to make it happen. Maybe this is where Kremlin agents around Johnson kept getting it wrong. They're used to the way things work in Russia. They kept forgetting that not all countries will put into action the most insane political instructions without question. But bad enough that we had a Prime Minister who actually wanted us to commit an unprovoked act of war against a neighbouring ally, that even after, having come out against the notion of invading European countries since, he still thinks it's something worth boasting about in his book, because he is boasting. He's not saying, oh, well, as far as I can tell in terms of the reports, I've not read the book. He doesn't seem to be saying, oh, yeah, I did this thing. It was a bit silly. Shouldn't have done it. Sorry, I got a bit drunk. No, he's boasting about it. He says, well, I absolutely should have done it. Then there's this insistence that he shouldn't have apologised for Partygate. That's what he's saying now. He describes it as a catastrophic mistake, apologising. And he says in a report that he originally apologised in order to diffuse public anger, thus admitting that he just tried to lie to the public to get them to shut up, right, as well as MPs. But he says he was apologising for events he knew nothing about. Now, not only was he personally at the centre of many of these events, but he was in charge of all of them. He is effectively trying to get us to believe that he didn't know what was going on within the workplace he managed. And when things came to light, as there were no sackings, we can get the impression that when they did come to light, he thought, well, it was absolutely fine. So he takes responsibility. And it's back to the same old lines. In order to try and deny that he was maliciously responsible, he instead tries to claim that he was merely incompetent. And the only reason he keeps getting away with it is because the media do not make these points to him. Which is it, former Prime Minister? Are you malicious or are you incompetent? If he cannot even control what goes on inside the building he occupies and is in charge of, how on earth can he control what goes on across the operation of the state nationally? And as I had to keep saying when he was Prime Minister, to someone reading excuses like this, really shouldn't matter whether you believe them or not. If you don't believe them, then his behaviour was appalling and he should not have been leading the government. But if you do believe them, then he was incapable of leading even the people he personally hired and worked in the same building as him, and so is woefully incapable of leading the country. Now, I won't be reading this book. Apart from anything else, from a fantasist like Johnson, you won't know what to believe until it's verifiable. I am disappointed they've changed the front cover. They absolutely should have gone with my suggestion, but never mind. But it occurs to me that this book might be cover-to-cover reasons why Johnson should never have been put in charge of a tuck shop, much less a G7 government. And it's testament to just how unsuitable he was, that he thinks, even to this day, that his behaviour was somehow fine. Laudable even. Because remember, like I said, the reason former senior politicians of all kinds, but prime ministers particularly, publish memoirs, yes, they make money out of it. But it's to try and say, oh no, actually my time in office, I actually did lots of clever things you never knew about because I couldn't talk about it at the time, but I actually did loads of great things, right? You put a lot of spin on it to make out that you did all these great things, and also to try and excuse some of the not so great things you did. If Johnson's boasting about really terrible things in it, he thinks it was a good thing. But anyway, there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.